I think about is like there's so much stuff that is on Netflix, for example, then gets taken down, and we don't really understand why it gets taken down, and we don't know where it goes. And a lot of it ends up getting lost, or none of it gets a physical media release. And so, how do you like cherish or revisit media? How do you build a relationship with it over time? In a lot of instances, we can't.
Hi, my name is Adam Freeman. This is Comic Industry Insiders, a weekly podcast where we talk to the movers and shakers of the comic book industry. We dig into their careers, their lives. We get to know who they are, what their hobbies are, and we also try and learn something about what got them to the place that they are, so that you can learn something for your business or career in comics. This year, I've really been looking forward to our interview this week. But before that, I want to tell you a story. Every year in San Diego Comic-Con, there's always a tone in the air, and everyone kind of comes away feeling that tone. Some years it's more challenging. People are afraid about the future of our industry. This year, though, like many others, I felt the energy was just optimistic and energetic. There are a lot of reasons for that. But a lot of that energy came from a new generation of leaders that are beginning to take their place in our industry. You begin to see them, and you begin to notice that they have a distinct flavor to them. A couple of people I think of as being from that generation have already been on our show. People like Morgan Perry, Julia Walchuk. I would even argue our producer, Stephanie Gerk, is in that list. But definitely in that list is our guest this week, Mr. Sam Kusek. If you don't know who Sam is, chances are you are not in comics publishing right now. In April of this year, he took his place in the coveted position of the Senior Outreach Lead at Kickstarter, a crowdfunding platform that has changed the landscape of independent comics publishing in the past decade. In this role, he'll help shape the success of comics publishers on that platform, which can have a dramatic effect on the success of those publishers everywhere else. I cannot think of a better person for this job. I think as many of us who knew Sam when his name was announced knew that this was the right choice. So he's been on my radar for about a decade now, and I'm so thrilled to finally get a chance to sit down and talk to him. Hey, Sam, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well, Adam. How are you? Thank you for having me, and thank you for such a nice, warm introduction. I appreciate that.
It is, it's really the only reason that I do these things is so that I can write your eulogy and test it out so that, later.
You've found a Lazarus pit or some other sort of means of staying alive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. And so I know ahead of time that I'm going to need these things. So I'm just working material, really. This is just this interview.
You're gonna be the first sort of like comic stand up, the comic blend, right? Where you can do a new hour every year. Yeah.
That's right. Exactly. So, how are things? How's this lovely office? I'm going to assume that you're not in a garage, but you've actually put a garage door on your office.
I am in a garage. So I live in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
We bought, my partner Sandra Lance and I bought our home now almost 3 years ago. And the house had a garage, which was being used as a traditional garage, but this was during the height of the pandemic. We painted it, we insulated it, we have a mini split in here, so this has become a comfortable studio. It's really great to be able to just like close your door with work at the end of the day. And I have all my fun stuff here too. We have a lot of fun stuff in the house, but it's also nice to just have more of my like very me art. Like I have a tattoo flash sheet here, Godzilla, Ultraman from another tattoo artist. So just a lot of it's nice to have like a dedicated space where you can be a big nerd, especially when you can be a big nerd professionally.
I
then
see.
when you show up on video calls like this,
exactly,
voila.
And you have this landscape. I, meanwhile, am in some sort of tropical Airbnb and not in at all a lot of comics. That's exactly, vacation. So I didn't spend all day working in here. Am I seeing right? Are you just like running some sort of like VHS pirating thing operation here? Is that what's going on in the upper right?
So these are from my grandmother. These are VHS containers, and these are family VHS. Actually,
Oh,
you may
okay.
not be able to see them on camera. And then this is a CRT that my friend found on the side of the street. It still works. So we passed it around our friend group a little bit. But I think I currently have 5 VCRs because they're one of those things that, like, if you see one, you buy it, they'll die
Yeah.
eventually. I'm really hoping, I've seen some ads for people like making new tape cassette players. And I'm like, well,
Oh,
VCRs can't be that far off, right? Like, we should be
yeah.
able to sort of reverse engineer and re-release a like $400 version of this through Urban Outfitters or
How
something
has
like
there not
that.
been a Kickstarter for new VCRs?
Maybe one will come. I think people just don't want to take on the manufacturing
Yeah,
of it.
total pain
But
in the ass. Yeah.
yeah, but
Well,
I do love VHS. Big scene here in Portland, Oregon. Surprise, surprise. But we also have one of the best video stores here called Movie Madness, which is now a nonprofit organization. But they have over, I think, like 9,000 titles, all available. You can go in, rent whatever. I
yeah,
found great, just like out of print, no longer available stuff, or things that never made the jump from VHS to DVD.
yeah,
There's a ton of really great stuff out there that only exists on VHS. So it's fun for me, and I think comics people will appreciate like the feeling of hunting something
yeah,
down or finding
exactly.
something you've never heard about and being really wowed by it is like what a treat. You know?
I will tell you. I mean, I haven't gone backwards that far yet, but I did buy Gabby a DVD player for Christmas this year because it was a movie that we couldn't get streaming, and
Yeah,
and I understand that there are plenty of I don't know. Do you know a man named Brockton McKinney?
I
He
don't.
oh, you should meet Brockton. You would like him a lot.
Yeah.
He does all the videos for Bad Idea.
Okay.
And I believe he's actually just taking a bigger role. Anyway, he does a lot of comics, but he and his buddy have this like it's garages full of VHS players and old VH play. And if you go to the show NC Comic Con in I think it's Raleigh, North Carolina every year, they tend to take a suite and just watch movies all weekend.
I think
It's
Brad Brooks told me about that.
oh yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
time. It's a good
Yeah.
time. Well, listen, Kickstarter, you've been at it for now. Let's see, it's August now, 4 months.
I've been officially in the role for about that time, and then
Yeah,
previous to that, I was at Boom doing their Kickstarters, and then I've
right.
done my own for my tabletop role playing games. And yeah, it was funny when I applied for the job. I was working on finalizing a book for, I expanded my game Henshin. So at the beginning of the year, I did a campaign and I was still working for Boom. And I was like, man, I'm just like doing this all the time. And like, I was set up for success at Boom and in a good situation. But then when the job opened up, I was like, ooh, like I could do this at a much larger scale. Um, and like have a bigger impact than just working for a single publisher, you know?
Like all people who want to work in tech, we can scale this. We can scale.
We can scale this. But yeah, it's great, man. It's a really interesting role. And I know we saw each other at San Diego and talked a
Yeah.
bit about it, but for me, I hadn't been to San Diego since 2018. I took a little bit of a break and then the pandemic hit, and then I had a child, and then I had another child, so there was not a lot of flexibility in my schedule. And so going back to the show with a new role and a new set of values and like things that I can present to people and make introductions to people, that's also been a real just like wind in my sails
Right.
to come back into a space you love and are familiar with, but you're kind of in a new form, so to speak.
Yeah, I have no doubt. I mean, things change, but they also just stay the same, right? I mean, in many
Sure.
ways, I felt like this year, especially, it was like I've been going to the same bars and the same restaurants every year. They'll just kind of like, it's almost like the rest of the year doesn't really matter. This
Yeah.
is where I work. It's a very odd experience. Well, I do want to go. Let's come back to all of that. Let's start earlier. Let's start with a younger Sam,
Mm.
and let's get started way back when you're from Massachusetts. It seems like that. If I'm looking at your resume on LinkedIn, it looks like all of your earliest jobs are in that area.
Yeah, so my like first official start into comics is working for Comicopia, which is a shop in Boston in the Kenmore Square area. They are, I was told at one point, they are the second largest retailer for manga in the United States outside of Midtown Comics. And like let that sink in of like Midtown is
Wow.
three locations in Manhattan. This is a small store relatively in the Boston area,
Yeah.
but they every year will go to Anime Boston and have just a huge selection of manga available, and they would just hire customers or people that they knew through their staff. And I tried that out because I was reading a lot of manga, uh, and was just interested in the convention space. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts and didn't have a lot of access to like the comic scene. I have a lot of access
Yeah.
to comics and manga, but not the scene necessarily. And so I started doing that and started doing that more consistently. And through that store, I actually got a job reviewing manga for Pop Culture Shock's Manga Recon, which, if you look on an internet archive, it's still available, but uh, it's no longer around. But that
Yeah.
was great. I did that for about 2 years. So I was in this like press role, but still trying to get to know the business side of it. And I went to school for marketing communications at Emerson. And so any chance I got, I would use manga and comics as my like company examples for like, how are they marketing? What are they doing?
Yeah.
And I was just like eating and breathing and living manga and comics. And then after I graduated from Emerson, Emerson is a theater school, if you're not familiar with it. It was described to me in high school as like the Harvard for misfit kids. Um, and I was like, awesome, that's exactly where
that's
I want to go.
that's me.
Um, um,
Uh,
and when I was there, I started a comics journal with some friends, and we all graduated
cool.
at the same time. And we were like looking for a thing to do. We were like, we need like a project, we need a thing, because that's just we were hungry, right? We were all
Yeah.
working, but we all wanted to like make our mark. And Kamikaze, another shop in the Boston area, they won the Eisner for the Retailer Spirit Award in 2016. They had a guy named Adam Warrock, who
All right.
listeners of this program might remember, who did a great mixtape for Oni Press. He was on tour and came through and did a rap show there.
I
And I was like,
actually I owned a comic shop from 2000 to 2010, and we had Adam in for an event,
yeah,
and he brought the party. That was a good time.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I saw photos of that, and something clicked in my head where I was like, "Holy shit! Like you can do stuff like at comic shops, like that is
Yeah.
not necessarily a signing or not necessarily comic related." So I went. I met Bob, who's one of the owners there.
Mm-hmm.
Pitched him on an idea to do a like serialized stage show, and then we did that. I did that for about a year, and then that sort of built up the events practice at Kamikaze where more events started happening. There was a stand up showcase. There was a Rocky Horror Picture Show. People would
In
sort
the
of
in the
do
shop. Yeah.
yeah, people would do a live rendition of that. Uh, some great local podcasts would do things. And so I eventually went and worked for the store for 3 years after that, just managing all of their events
Just the
coordination,
live events.
just the live events and some signings and things like that. They've since gone on to they do a really great convention called Ladies Con, which happens, I think, in the fall of the year.
Yeah.
And that's a much bigger, broader scale thing. But for me, it was like we have a cool back room. We're developing the look and feel of it. And so myself and Tom, or a guy named Tom, and Renee, who both worked for the store, and Bob all developed this space together.
So it was a separate space. So you weren't having these events like inside of the retail
No, it was
store.
it was inside the retail store.
Oh,
So
okay.
when you go into Kamikaze, there's a smaller section, almost kind of more railroady,
Mm-hmm.
like a railroad apartment,
Mm-hmm.
if people are familiar with that. And then you go to the back, and there's just a huge set of walls of action figures. And so that was our backdrop for the comedy show, was
Gotcha.
just this
Okay.
wall of action figures. And that was where we did the events because we could fit a good 40 people or so in there.
When you say it was a serialized stage show, what does that mean? Like, was this a?
So we would have bits. are reoccurring characters and reoccurring scenarios. So we had one called Meanwhile that was just like a Justice League like outfit of heroes, and the first season or the first episode we did for them was one of the characters named Speedo had died because the performer couldn't come. They had all chosen their characters, and Jesse, who played Speedo, couldn't show up. So then the second, and we talked about his death in the first episode, and then the second episode we did the return of Speedo, which I thought was funny because we're like, here's a character you know nothing about, but the whole story is kind of centered around his return.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had 4 recurring stories, and then we would have games in between to kind of break up the story of it. And the stories were very loosely constructed. It was like, here's plot point A where we start, and we need to get to B, and here are some beats we want to hit in between, but everything kind of gets filled in.
It was all improvised then, is what
All
you're saying.
improvised,
That's really wonderful.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And the show ran for like 5 years. I think the pandemic put a stop on it, and then people kind of moved on from things. But
Sure.
two brothers, Alex and John Lang, who were there from the beginning, took it over and ran with it and did their own thing for a really long time. So
did that? I mean, it seems so. Jumping ahead for a moment, you have your company that does the role playing games.
Yes,
it's going to be right here in front of me. Cave of Monsters. Obviously, that comes from a love of RPGs, and this sounds like that. This show kind of comes out of that as well. Is this something you've always been involved in? Is this where does this begin for you?
That's a great question. It's funny because I didn't grow up reading a ton of RPGs, but I love the books, and I love the idea of like collaboratively telling stories. And I have some drawings I found. My parents recently moved, so we went through that whole sort of like go home and get all the rest of your stuff. And I have some drawings of like making my own Power Rangers teams and things like that. So I think I was always really interested in like, you see something you love, a set format you love, and then figuring out a way to tell your own stories within it and giving people a template to be able to do that. And I got more into improv when I was in college and post-college because Boston at that time had a really good improv scene. And it was just inspiring to be able to see people think so freely on their feet and to be able to make such funny and bold choices. But I always hate being on stage. I like the intimacy of like the one-on-one or the group conversation. And so games felt like a natural fit there. And Cave of Monsters was really a direct spin-off of my, so like jumping ahead and then back a little bit. Cave of Monsters was a spin-off of my working at Boom Studios, because when I was at Boom, they acquired the Power Rangers license.
Okay.
And I was always a Power Rangers fan and kind of fell off of it when I was a teen. And then when they got the license, I got like really back into it because I was selling variant covers to retailers and like hearing more about the development of what the series was going to be like. And so I just watched a ton of it. And I moved to Portland shortly after that and started playing more role-playing games as a way to just like socialize and get to know people.
Right.
And I asked people, I was like, is there like a Sentai game or a make your own Power Rangers game? And they were like, no, there's like a couple things, but nothing super comprehensive. And I was like, oh, I'll just fucking make my own thing. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear on here.
Please, fucking swear all you want. It's fine.
But a lot of my like mentality towards making stuff is just like, I just am gonna make my own thing, you know,
Right.
or like someone will do something and I'll be like, I can do that, you know, like I can figure out how to do that. So I'm pretty driven in that way, but I like the like collaboration and camaraderie and building those shared experiences. Those are the kind of things that I look for and how I want to spend my time and the things that I want to make, right?
It's interesting that you didn't really, seemingly though, you didn't really head down a more like traditional storytelling path, right? You didn't. There's at no point does it sound like you were like, I'm going to be a comic book writer. You know,
Yeah.
That's interesting that you didn't find that path for yourself. Though, so.
I think it kind of comes down to, so my experience, unlike other people in the generation or most comics people that I talk to, because I think in comics it's very easy to get into a comics role and work in different sides of the business, but just be in the business, you
Yeah.
know? And so prior to coming, my timeline is I started in comics in Massachusetts with Kamikaze and Comicopia, as I mentioned. But I was also working as a project manager for a couple of website and development firms.
Comicopia. Who's the owner of that? Is
Matt Lehman.
Matt
Uh,
Lehman?
yeah,
Yes.
great guy. Also
Yeah.
an apologies, Matt, if you see this and I get this wrong. He's a math professor.
He is.
At one of the UMasses, I think UMass South Boston.
That's right.
Yeah.
He whooped my ass at backgammon once, and I'm a pretty decent backgammon player.
Yeah.
I'm much better now. Matt, if you're listening to this, I'm ready for a rematch, buddy. But yeah, anyway, don't play backgammon with a math professor. What are
No.
you doing?
Yeah.
Anyway,
No.
sorry. I knew something was jogging my memory there. I totally forgot about that. Anyway, I'm sorry. I interrupted your story.
No worries.
Yeah.
For me, I was a project manager for website and development firms for a couple of years before I went to Boom. I left Massachusetts to go for this Boom role to be their direct market representative and help pioneer the sales team. And then when I moved to Portland, that was when remote work was still not really like a thing that people or companies were interested in. So I amicably left Boom, was able to still stay on and go to shows with them, which was really great. They would hire me out to go to shows. I knew how the flow worked already, so I could just kind of easily slot in and help everybody else out. They didn't have to train me up. But I then worked in project management again for another about like 5 years or so. So I have this experience of like managing larger teams, interfacing with clients, doing a lot of like technology problem solving. And the what I'm trying to lead to is I identified earlier on that my skill set is really in like organizing information and creating systems and like coming up with ways for people to get the things that they need. I'm not really much of a writer. I write great emails, but like from a narrative perspective, something about that language doesn't intuitively work for me. So rather than try and fit that a square peg into a round hole, it's like, well, I'm just gonna like I kind of want to do what I'm good at, but do something creative. And that's where the game thing came out of, because games are just really like system development as a way.
Oh, interesting.
In a way, if you
Yeah.
create Henshin is like using Henshin as an example, like Henshin is setting agnostic. So you can say like, I want to make medieval Power Rangers. You can do it. You can make space. You can do whatever you want. And that was a deliberate choice of like, it doesn't really matter what kind of story you're telling. That's up to you. But here are the parameters and the guidelines for you to be able to tell it so that the bumps you come up against feel realistic and challenging without feeling like you can do whatever you want, you know?
Right. How do you? Oh, well, so let's deal with that. We've talked a little bit about your company. How does Cave of Monsters? How does that come about?
I met a guy named Tim Batchick here in Portland, Oregon, and we started collaborating on Henshin, and eventually got to a point where we had play tested it enough that I was like, let's put it out online and sort of see what the response is like. So we put it out as a pay what you want thing on Gumroad, and we get pretty good response. I think within 2 weeks we got like 2,500 downloads, right? And some people paid for it. There's some people who like gave us some nice cash, which they didn't have to do. It's really great that they did. And then the majority of people took it for free, right? And that's like the base game. There's not a lot of fluff to it. But it was great for us to like use those people to build more of an audience and a communication or an email list and have more direct communication with. And then about 2 years later, we had done enough with it that with Henshin, one thing that we released is we released the base game and then we released modules, which are pre-made adventures. So, going along with that, the base game being setting agnostic, we're able to lay in whatever aesthetics we want on top of it, right? And that allows us to be a bit more creative of like, I wanted to make a Universal Monsters Sentai, so we did that. We did a food-based one, and we always wanted to have a printed book, and so we were like, let's do I was like, let's do a Kickstarter, because other people in the game space were doing it. It seemed like a great way to get money and engage with the fans, right? And so we did a Kickstarter, and that was pretty successful. We asked for $5,000. We ended up making $25,000, um, which is great. Like
That's a
it's a
nice chunk. Yeah.
nice chunk, and that allowed us to the stretch goals we hit allowed us to add different playbooks to the game. It allowed us to hire on some people to do additional art. It allowed us to fund some expanded content and make the game. Our pitch was help us make the game the best version of the game as it could be, right?
Right.
And I think that pitch really resonates with people, and I think that continues to resonate with people not only with games but with comics as well. Of your community involvement and engagement can really just like elevate the things that you care about.
Right.
Um,
Right. Would you say, is there, I mean, we are jumping around quite a bit, and I do
sure.
want to go back a little bit, but would you say that there's, is that the special sauce? Is there a special sauce that you've seen for like what we think of as the hits, right? The ones that have really caught fire in crowdfunding. What do you think is there an overlap in that Venn diagram?
Yeah, I think so. I think for me, the hits that I think about, yeah, I think about Wander Home. J Dragon's Wander Home is a great tabletop role playing game example. And I think in that instance, there's not only like help the product become the best version uh, that it can be, but crowdfunding is great for just like elevating underserved voices and allowing people to see themselves uh, in the content. Wonder Home, if you don't know it, it's a game about it's a pastoral fantasy game. So if you think about like, it's kind of like Redwall without any violence, right? That's kind of the pull that I'm going, or Frog and Toad, where you're playing as anthropomorphized animal folks. You're going on a journey. You all have things that you're working on, but there's no violence. There's no hit points. There's none of that sort of like traditional D&D problem solving. And I think people really resonate with that because you can see more of yourself in just the self exploration. And I think
Hmm.
the hit projects really touch upon that of holding up that mirror to an audience where they're able to point to it and say that product really represents who I am and the things that I care about, and being able to then help fund and put more of yourself into that just helps you feel like you're buying into this idea that I can fund and help produce the type of content that I want. Is
Right.
going back to like we touched on streaming services and stuff. I think we're at a point in culture where like the media that we're served is not necessarily in our control, and I personally find that really frustrating. Um, where
Yeah. The
you know
media
like
the media that we're okay. Say that again.
maybe there's a better way to say that
No,
where
no, it
like
was good. It was good. You're right. The way that we are interacting, media is our voice, right? It is our conversation, our culture. And what you're saying is that we're not controlling our own voice, conversation, and culture. Am I
well
putting words in your mouth?
no, I think that's fair. I think one thing that I think about is like there's so much stuff that is on Netflix, for example, then gets taken down and we don't really understand why it gets taken down and we don't
Right,
know where it goes. And a lot of it ends up getting lost or none of it gets a physical media release. And so how do you like cherish or revisit media? How do you build a relationship with it over time? In a lot of instances we can't. Or you look at like what was that movie that came out was supposed to come out, the like Warner versus Acme or Coyote versus Acme, that was supposed to come out that people were really up in arms of. It seems like there's a lot of creative decisions that are being made for us, sort of in the
right,
hopes that like maybe something cool and interesting will come out, but stuff comes and goes, and we never really have the chance to like cherish it, or hold on to it and build those kind of like Disney level relationships people have with media. Sorry, I'm gonna kick
right.
this guy out of here. He's like, your
He
lap,
really
cool,
he
yeah.
really wants to be on this. It's fine. No, I do find that really interesting, and I think it might be why we are resonating so much with physical media again, right? Is because it is permanent. It is something I can hang on to and carry with me, as much as that becomes its own responsibility of
Yeah, and
finding room for it and then moving it with me when I move and so on, right?
I have like a library of comics that I've held on to of stuff I've had since I've been like 10 that I feel is really important for me to hang on to. And uh, I've moved houses with it. We have it in the house now. It's really great to have it all out, but it was for a while a responsibility of like, I need to cart this around. I had it in a storage unit where I had like dehumidifiers to make sure nothing got damaged. Um, but it is representative of my taste, and at least for me now being in a more professional nerd space, like
Sure.
this is very much a part of my journey. I can point to things and say, I remember who I was when I got that, or like this is a really crucial book for me because it allowed me to sort of understand X, Y, and Z. Um, and I think if everything is within the net and outside of our control, like our relationship to it becomes less vital and less important. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
What all right. This is really good. Let's go to so there's a moment here, there's a gap that I don't quite understand. So you're in Massachusetts, you're doing a lot of stuff for local comic shops, you're doing a lot of programming, doing some journalistic stuff. At some point you make the leap from do you move to LA to work for Boom?
Yeah, so there is we're uncovering another piece of the puzzle where two things happen. One, Kickstarter comes into play where there is a show that inspired the stage show that I did called the Thrilling Adventure Hour. If you're
I
not
remember the
familiar with
Thrilling
it,
Adventure Hour,
yeah.
yeah.
So I got really into the Thrilling Adventure Hour,
Yeah.
and they, through Archaea, did a Kickstarter for a graphic novel. One of the rewards for that was be an assistant editor with Joe LaFavi for $300, and I was like, absolutely. So I did it, and I got to work with Joe, and this was at the time that Archaea got acquired by Boom, like in the same couple of months, I think during the campaign that got announced, and
Right.
so that for me really ended up being a big advantageous thing where I not only got to work with Joe, who's great and develops a lot of really interesting content, but then I got introduced to the Boom team. So I got to meet Philip and Mel, Kylo, who was
Mm-hmm.
part of the team at that time.
So he
Um,
went from Archaea to Boom
yep,
during that
yep.
transition. Yeah.
And that I started having more conversations with them because they debuted the book at New York Comic Con, and I said, "Hey, I'm in Massachusetts. Can I get a pass? You guys don't have to put me up or anything, but can I come and like be part of the booth?" So I
Yeah.
was able to do that. Got to meet a lot of the stars of the show, which was great. I have a copy of the book that they were numbered, but mine was one of the like unnumbered ones. So Ben Acker did like a special numbering on it, so I have a unique one.
Yeah.
And for me, that was my like first official like, whoa, I'm like in the publishing business moment, right? Where like my name's in the credits and I contributed somewhat to the book. An assistant editor through Kickstarter, you don't actually do all that much, but it was still cool to be like involved and see how the sausage was made, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I interviewed for, I forget what the position was specifically, but I interviewed with Philip and Mel for a position that ended up going to the wonderful Stephanie Hokut. Um, and then a couple months later, they hit me up. They hired me to do another sort of like database project for them, and then they hit me up after that and they offered me the position of the direct market rep because they felt
Yeah.
that they needed somebody in that space. And so I took that job, and that's what brought me to Los Angeles.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. But so you, because of your experience working with retailers in Boston, right? This is, yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Well, I can tell you that that then we have that shared connection because as I spent probably 15 years as a retailer, and then when I decided to want to move into publishing, I told Philip, and at the time he was working at Top Cow, and he basically hired me to handle, to work with retailers. So
I
yeah,
didn't know that. That's great.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's an
He-
interesting gig. It's like a really fun part of the business, I
It
think, because
is.
you're so boots on the ground. Um,
Yeah, it very
yeah,
much is. I keep saying one of my biggest notes for publishers that come into the space, especially when they come in from outside of comics, is I tell them, like, if you want to make an impact, if you want to sell, comics is just about ground game,
yeah.
right? It's about getting to know hand sellers. It's about creating relationships. It's about getting to know what each store needs and what their voices are going to say. All that stuff you can't do from 10,000 feet,
And
so
that's too, going back to or talking about like the younger generation of folks. I feel like that's where a lot of us came from. Like
yep,
I know Morgan came from a shop in the Los Angeles area. I came out of shops in Boston. Michael Torma, who's over at Oni Press now, was
that's right.
from Third Eye. Like there's a ton of us who are just like waiting in the wings and like learning and cultivating knowledge. Yeah.
It's interesting that it's funny you mentioned Torma. Torma was one of those guys that I had seen and said this guy's gonna, and I'm not saying that Hunter hired him because I said someday somebody's gonna hire him, but I hope that that's the case, Hunter. But I he you do see this when you work in publishing. You get to know who the next round is going to be. And I will say that, like, when the time came, Steve Anderson reached out to a couple people, and I'm assuming Hunter was one of them, and said, "Look, if you want," because I at one point was going to recruit Torma, and he was like, I feel like he has a role here. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to get in the way. But I
Yeah.
couple that with, I just spoke to another retailer who has recently had one of his staff make a transition from retail to publishing, and he was a little bitter about it. He was a little,
Mm.
because he felt like, how are comics retail going to grow if the best and brightest keep getting poached by publishing? It's not he's not wrong, but also it's just kind of how the system works. I don't know. It's an interesting problem I've been noodling around with, and I don't really have an answer to.
Yeah, I don't think there's a really clear answer to it. In my philosophy is always like, what opportunities can I give back to that space?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
like one thing I am starting to investigate at Kickstarter is there are some comics campaigns that have retailer tiers.
Yeah.
There are some comic campaigns that don't. Some comic campaigns that do. uh, the barrier to entry doesn't super make sense, right? And then some really make sense. And I know there's a sentiment, or I've heard tale that there's a sentiment in the retailer space that people feel like it takes a bit of business away. It's not necessarily supplemental or additive. And I'd like to find ways to change that attitude, to get people more involved in the comics that are coming out on Kickstarter, and maybe encourage them in whatever ways are appropriate to run their own campaigns. We're all
Yeah.
part of this one larger ecosystem. One thing I found really interesting about this new role is like coming in. There's so much segmentation within the comics ecosystem, right? On
Yeah.
Kickstarter, you have independent creators, small press people, larger publishers, and all of their needs across campaigns are very different. Um, and it's just got me thinking about like the individualistic needs, because we're not just like, there's not a one size fits all solution. Uh, you know,
Right.
um,
As
yeah,
you bring more people in, the level of complexity escalates because everybody has different needs. And as you become more important, which Kickstarter has, as I said in the intro, like any publishing that isn't at least looking at Kickstarter or other crowdfunding as part of their overall plan. I don't know what their plan is. I mean, it is some audience building there, but let's give voice to that. Let's jump ahead to that, because there are two different sides to this as I hear them. So let me give them both to you, right?
sure.
Why would I'm a retailer? Why would I want to buy product from a Kickstarter, even if it's giving me my same discount? Why would I want to spend my money ahead of time on something I may never get? It may not fulfill, right? And on a project, or even better, if it gets solicited later through a regular distributor, why would I want to purchase it when I know that everybody I know who likes that artist already bought it through the Kickstarter? What's the answer
It's
there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the big answer there is like you don't there's always going to be somebody who like you don't know or somebody who walks in the door who will be like, "Oh, that's absolutely for me." That like it's good to account for. You know, you have to make the right business decisions in the right time, but I would say that there's always the unknown unknown. In terms of uh, worrying about things getting funded, I'll share, and I share this at San Diego, that the Kickstarter comics category has a 78% success rate, which is 37% higher than the site average. So comics on a whole are funding like very rapidly, very successfully. In terms of comics funding on Kickstarter, we had a 78% success rate, which is 37% higher than the site average. And I will say the things that I've seen not fund are projects where people will not fund, learn some hard lessons, and come back and redo that project. Most of the stuff that goes out will eventually get funded, and they learn some hard lessons there. The things that don't fund, we've started to identify are like some scam accounts or things that are disingenuous that will either not fund or get shut down. So comics is becoming just this like stronger and stronger base on Kickstarter in terms of producing really interesting content. Um, and yeah, I think it's tapping into an audience and a fan base that isn't there through the direct market channels, and allowing it allows retailers to, you know, vote with their dollars for who they think the next top tier talent is going to be. So you get, I mean, bragging rights, it doesn't necessarily put food on the table, but if you're somebody who cares about the development of the space and wants to empower people to take their next step and put interesting content out into the world, and then bring those people into the store and build that core competency, and this is your opportunity to vote with your dollars there, and get some things in.
I do have a ton of Kickstarter questions, but I want to go
Sure.
back a little more into your personal narrative here. So you at some point you leave LA. Any other I understand that there were maybe was there any other, let's just say, side jobs while you were in LA? Did you have do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
so when I worked in Los Angeles, I lived in MacArthur Park, which is just outside of downtown Los Angeles, and I was fortunate enough to move into my neighborhood at the same time the Terragram Ballroom was moving or opened up. The Terragram Ballroom is a rock club held by some people who had started a couple of rock clubs in the New York area. So this was their like West Coast venture, and they
Nice.
needed a line cook. And I had done some restaurant work growing up. There was a small cafe. You know, you have jobs as a teenager, and
I was a line
uh,
cook. I
yeah.
loved being a line cook. Man,
Oh,
that was one of my favorite jobs ever. It's so mentally engaging. It's like downhill skiing for 8 hours a day, right? It's just you have to be in it. Do you
I
know what I
think
mean?
it's like being in it, but the thing that I love the most about it is like there's something so nice about making food for people and making
Yes.
food that you don't necessarily have to eat. You know, you
Yeah.
can be like, I made this really great thing and now it's like out in the world, you know? And that was
Yeah.
fun because it's a mix of like fans and people who are there to see the shows. And then I also made food for the acts. So like Queens of
Oh,
the
right.
Stone Age came through, a number of other like higher profile bands. And there's a direct kind of level of appreciation that you get out of it. Because as a line cook, you know, you're an hourly employee. It's not the same time as like a bartender where you get tips or anything like that.
Yeah.
But everybody's got to eat, you know? Like
True.
everybody needs food. If you bring somebody like BLT sliders or a hamburger that you made and it looks nice and it's got like quality ingredients in it, that's a nice thing about working at the Terragram Ballroom is they they bought a lot of really nice high-end ingredients, and we were allowed to utilize them to their fullest effect, right? Like
Oh,
we weren't
awesome.
super restricted. The food wasn't garbage or anything like that. So it was nice to give people like really satisfying, meaningful, fulfilling food, and then they get to see entertainment on top of that. And that helped me, you know, like I'm not disparaging Boom by saying this, but like a entry level comics job was a pay cut for me. I knew that going into it. And so you have to adjust your finances and your lifestyle accordingly. Like that's part of the
Right.
getting into the business. And working at a restaurant like helped me get by because I was able to eat. They didn't track staff meals, which was great. So I just kind of like I was able to take advantage. Not saying I was stealing food from the organization, but
No,
you
but
know,
you
you have dinner
graze.
at work. You have
Yeah.
dinner at work, and it saves you some scratch elsewhere. So like, it just ended up being a really solidifying experience for me to survive that transition.
I know that when I was a line cook, we talked. We were people would just graze all day long. You never took a meal break because it
Yeah,
was too much to do. So you're always like, taking a dip of this, that, whatever.
yeah,
There's always something, and and then like I said, 8-10 hours later, and you're like, what the? Oh, I'm alive. This is very strange. I don't know. I loved that job. I can tell you, actually, this is something you and I also share. I know that you're a bike rider. One of the big moments for me in living in New York and riding my bike in New York was there was this moment of riding through Manhattan, and there's traffic everywhere, right?
yeah,
And I always say that you're the sole job of everybody in New York. If you're a car or a bike or a pedestrian or a truck or whatever, your job is just to not hit anything. Just don't run into anything, and everybody's going to be fine, right?
yeah,
And so I was approaching this crosswalk, and there's this like two groups of people, and there's just like one. I can see that as they go past, there's one gap in the people that's going to line up, and I just go right through that gap, and it was like this. I could just see the whole world for a moment, and it took me right back to being a line cook. Like you're in the weeds, you're 6 tickets deep, and you're like, yeah, okay, I can do this. Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry. That's my own
No, it's
little
all good. I'm glad
TED
we get
talk
to
on.
share that experience. I think the head of publishing here and I talk about she waited tables for a really long time, and we
Yeah,
both are like, it's such a humbling experience to work in food service,
it
and it
is
really gives you that like appreciation for people that I
service.
think makes service that I think makes like the comic book industry. It makes it easier working in the comics and publishing industry because you're
Yeah,
able to just like have more honest, genuine conversations because you've been in the trenches.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Is this Oriana you're talking about?
yeah,
She's fantastic. I
she's
love
great.
Oriana.
Yeah,
I
I'm so fortunate to have come into this role with her, having like helmed a lot of comics and
Yeah,
Bryce's absence. She took on a lot of the responsibility and like she's giving me fantastic oversight and just what a wonderful person to partner with coming into
yeah.
Kickstarter. Yeah.
I will tell you that she told me about this event that I now go to every Halloween called Bike Hell in New York, and it's legitimately just people making these bike sculptures and like getting together in this totally pirate. I have scars. It's incredible. It's wonderful. I cannot recommend it enough. All right. Anyway,
Oh.
let's get back to you. I'm gonna skip ahead here a little bit. So you're at Boom at some point. I don't know where that transition happens, but it sounds like you stayed really connected to them and started doing what was a big piece of their business. You moved to Portland and you're doing some tech project management kind of stuff, right? That's kind of
Yep.
it seems like that's where your organizational brain kind of tech jumps in. And during that period, you start doing Cave of Monsters, and you start doing your own Kickstarters. At what point do you start doing the Kickstarters for Boom?
So that would have been like 2022 or towards
Okay,
the end of 2022. I left a job I was a senior project manager, team lead for a company, and things were changing at that company. New CEO, the company was going towards wanting to go IPO, and I was like, I'm okay with this. I don't want to leave. I stayed at that job because when the pandemic hit, I was like, shit, I need stability, um, which I think is a very real thing for most Americans at that time.
sure, yeah,
But I just was like, I want to get back into a creative space and reached out to Philip. And this was when Hunter was making the transition to Oni, and Hunter at
right,
that time was leading the charge with a lot of Kickstarters. And Philip was like, we need we need help. This is like a program that is not going to end for Boom. So it was right place, right time. But again, like I think a lot of my success in career moves have come from just like relationship management and sort of maintaining those points of contact and just
Yeah.
checking in every once and again and then continuing to evolve on your own and be like, hey, I'm doing this now, or like I have this new capability. But that allowed me to go in and I helped with, I think it was 9 Kickstarters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Uh, so we started with the Expanse Dragon Tooth, which was really great. And that led to just some other licensed and original properties. A lot of Power Rangers stuff. We ran 2 Power Rangers campaigns. We did a Lumberjanes campaign that was really great. I ended when the James Tynion campaign came out.
Oh, wow. Okay,
And
great. Yeah.
then I transitioned over to Kickstarter officially. But it was great. It's so interesting to be able to go back to a company that you'd been to before. I hadn't had that experience before. I had always kind of moved on.
Right.
Um, so there were some people I still knew, a lot of people that were new to me, which is like, it's great to be able to see new faces and to have new people with some of the new people who came in were not comics people. They were people from other industries. So it was also, I think, a welcome injection of just like new blood into Boom of like, hey, we're going to do things differently because this is how another industry does it. And like,
Right.
I think that kind of thoughtful augmentation of the comics publishing space is like really welcome. I think that's a really neat thing.
And I think if Philip has a superpower, I think it's seeing talent,
Yeah,
and it's bringing in those kinds of voices, even when they are not more, they're not like the establishment of voices. He's always been that way. He's always been exploring as long as I've known it, as into those spaces where that maybe understand something better that we should be understanding better, right? I think
yeah,
that's the case. um what, speaking of Philip, during that period, I don't remember what it was I was commenting on, but I remember seeing, I obviously the Kickstarter has become more and more important for comics publishing. For me, it took on a whole nother level of importance because of Boom. I think it was that model of, we're going to use Kickstarter to launch this product that's going to be a hardcover. That hardcover, though, is not going to come out for 6 months to a year. In the meantime, we're going to put the single issues into comic shops. So now we've promoted the comic itself into comic shops, and we still have the hardcover cover coming from direct to consumer. Consumers that are waiting on the hardcover are still going to want the single issues, so they're going to double dip. Like, the whole model made sense to me, right?
yeah,
And I remember, I think it was about the time that you were there, and I'm really trying to remember what it was you guys were doing, but I remember it being new, and I said something about that to him, and he says, "Yeah, we always try and find one thing to experiment with each campaign, like one new idea, so we can see
yeah.
if that idea is working." So, long way to ask the question: what are the big learnings that you took out of that period? Because at the time, you're doing your kind of self-publishing campaigns, but you're also doing these massive, like the Expanse. That was 6 figures, seven. I mean, what did that get
Yeah,
to?
that
Right?
I think that crested 1 million. That was
Yeah.
the number that I look back on the most is it was funded by 12,000 people. And interestingly, an interesting metric I like to talk about is we surveyed those folks and we found about 51% of them don't have an existing relationship with comic shops, which is like pretty wild to think
Yeah.
about. Like, and so it's a great case to do crowdfunding and to do direct to consumer programs because you
Yeah.
are interacting with people who may, for whatever reason, not be able to get to a store on a regular basis. But that is just like that's where people are looking. People
Well, and
are terminally online in some way or form.
it's true. It's
Yeah,
12,000 people. 6,000 of them didn't have a relationship with a comic shop. I assume the other 6,000 can maintain the relationship with their comic shop. I guess my question is, how much? What was the project that this was?
that was the Expanse. Um,
So so that book was so big, and it did so well in the comic shops. I guess my other point here is those 6,000 people that had relationships with the comic shop, if the Expanse had come out during that period and it only circulated 6,000 copies, that's a
Yeah.
failure.
Yeah.
Right? But because of the Kickstarter, it actually becomes this massive success, both in the shops and crowdfunding. Which I don't know. I find that interesting, that symbiosis.
Yeah,
That I think a
totally.
lot of it gets a lot of
And
credit.
I think it comes down to when going back to the original question of like, what were my learnings? The thing you learn a lot about Kickstarters and doing them at those massive scales and then doing them at your own scale is like what ultimately, like, you have to think and plan for what the end shipping product looks like is one of the big learnings of
Sure.
with those larger license driven Kickstarters. It's very easy to dream up all the merchandise you could ever want, right? And you could do posters. With the Expanse, we did a replica hand terminal, which is just a futuristic cell phone from the show. But the question always becomes like, how are we going to get this to the customer without it getting broken, without it getting
Right.
damaged, so we don't have to fulfill any replacements or anything like that? So the big learning, and one thing that I feel like I'm constantly learning and relearning is just like, what is the holistic end-to-end process of that, and how do you create interesting products with multiple form factors? Because the Expanse was 12 single issues, 3 trades, 3 hardcovers, 4 boxes across all of the factions, and then like the hardcovers had to be coded to the boxes. Like there's a lot of nuance and complexity that came along with that, right? Like how do
Yeah.
you track all of that? How do you make sure that gets out? And the slight nuances are paid attention to, but they don't necessarily like break the bank or break a designer's mind with having to go through all of that. Um, and the thing I think we learned, the Expanse was great and it was hugely successful, but it was also a lot to get out. It ships across 3 waves, right? That's a lot operationally for a company to take on, especially when a lot of those people are also working in the direct market and in the book market, right? It's a
Right.
lot to manage. So if you look at some of the other campaigns, we scaled down and did simpler things, right? I think the Labyrinth campaign was just 4 books and that's it. No frills, no real changes to them across tiers, just different selections that you could get, maybe a box or two. But the question would always become like, how can we have the same impact with keeping things simple and digestible and easy for us to get out? And it's finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
I I've taken that with my projects, although I expanded a little bit with the Henshin expansion, but I did 2 covers of the same book. So the difference is really only the cover, but I was able to offer like one cover or the other or both. And you
Right.
could get the original game with an expansion, or you could get all of my printed games together. And the nice thing is I've had to buy one sleeve of packages for any configuration, right? So I don't really have to worry about like custom shipping solutions for anything like that. All of my stuff will work. It'll be a couple of weeks of just like packing things and going to USPS, right? But I've been able to scale's not really the right word. It's the opposite, like descale things down to a simple, repeatable process, right?
Right.
And I think that's my big takeaway with Kickstarter is big campaigns are great, but if you're ultimately looking to build an audience and looking to build up a book or a franchise, knowing how to repeat it, figure out ways to repeat it and make it easy on you and not completely detrimental to your way of life, that's really the goal, right? Is just like
Right.
it's turnkey, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that having been involved in some really complex campaigns, and some simpler ones, I can tell you that you do have to keep the end in mind. Although so much of it is, you work out how it can be solved, and then know that the final solution will probably be different, right?
Yeah.
Because as you get involved, you're going to find there's always going to be something, right? There's
That's
always
I think that's the other thing. It's a great reminder in Kickstarter campaigns, and I said this on a panel at San Diego, like no matter how well you plan, something will go wrong.
Oh yeah.
And it's like it's just budget for that. So many people run just like shoestring budgets, right? Where they're like, I need
Oh yeah.
$14,000. I'll ask for $14,000. And it's like, no, 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 baby. Like, give yourself a little buffer. Like, let yourself have some space to be able to like be more comfortable and let the bad things happen. For yeah.
Exactly. I think that's very smart. Um. All right. So let's talk about the companies versus creators. You and I had a
Sure.
pretty interesting conversation at a separate meeting with a client of mine about this. How do you see the difference between individual creators bringing campaigns versus larger companies, larger publishers? And I will say this is one of those things that people have some criticism of the larger companies that come to Kickstarter. Like, why am I crowdfunding this thing that you're just going to solicit otherwise? How do you respond to that? And how do you think about those differences?
Um, going back to the expanse point from a publisher coming to a direct to consumer platform like Kickstarter, it's not really about like Philip would always say, like, we're going to put these books out regardless. We are not dependent on this fulfilling for the project to be complete. The project is going to come out. It's going to be in the direct market. This is somebody's opportunity to get uh, things that are not going to be available within the direct market, like the merchandise, T-shirts, those replicas, posters, what have you. That kind of stuff is all available within a Kickstarter, and so there's more of a sense of fear of missing out, right? But
Right.
you're serving that. Underserved is not really the right word, but back to the point with the Expanse campaign, you're serving that audience that you can't normally target through direct market customers. And you're also building a case for the direct market and for the book market that there is a hunger for content like this, right? Having
True.
those metrics just helps the company in general say, we can do more licensed material or we can do more original material. So I think it's supplemental in just helping. The comics business is tough. And I think firing on all cylinders and being able to show success in one area helps you make stronger decisions in the other, right? Um, in terms of the difference between creators and publishers, with publishers, I feel like we see a lot more first time backers come to Kickstarter. I know for the Skybound G.I. Joe, like I said this to the company, like that project was never not going to be successful because it's G.I. Joe, one of the most revered American properties ever, from Skybound, one of the hottest publishers
Yeah.
currently, right? They're having just like a banger 10 years, it seems like.
Yeah.
So that project was always going to be successful, and we got a lot of people's foot in the door. And for us, for us and them, the play becomes how can we get them involved in like comics on Kickstarter as a whole. But frankly, like there's going to be a percentage of those people who just wanted GI Joe and that's all they want, and they're not going to come back. Um, and this is to say that from a creator's perspective, the people who are coming to your project are generally in it for the long haul, right? They want to see success. They want you to fund the book and fund more books after that and feel like they've contributed to your growth. They want to see their name in the book. I know from working as an independent creator, a lot of the rewards that I put out, and I know this isn't I wouldn't recommend this for everybody, but I'll just throw it out there because I do think it's something helpful. I will have participatory rewards. So someone can submit an idea for like a monster design that I will have illustrated. It's a higher price point, but the people who are really into that and want to like create stuff will pay that money to have that experience, right?
Oh, yeah.
I've had people pay $1,000 to create an adventure that is featured in my book. And those people come back and they're excited to have it, and it's a special moment for them, right? Um, a publisher isn't ever going to do that because there's so much that goes into that. If it's like a Power Rangers book, right, and you're funding a
Okay.
Power
Yeah. Yeah.
Rangers
Yeah.
thing, for licensed material, they're never going to do that
Oh, that's
because
true.
the
Yeah.
licensor is going to be like, no, 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 I don't want some rando who to come in with their wild idea, their crazy idea.
Hasbro's never saying yes to your GI Joe, right?
Right,
That's never going to happen.
right.
Or
But
was that Mattel?
an independent creator, you have the ability to say yes and no, and you have the ability to sort of work within your comfort level. So that level of flexibility can make a project like insanely exciting, right?
Right.
One of the projects, this is not a comics project, but I do think this is a funny example of there was a Kickstarter project many years ago where one guy was like, help me make potato salad. And he made just an absurd amount of money for like and he did this culminated in him like doing a show like where he went to a venue and like made potato salad in front of a crowd of people, and that was funded through Kickstarter, and people just be like, yeah, here's like a wild idea that's just like really fun and exciting. And I think there are ways to proactively engage in that. I talked to a
Sure.
creator who's going to do a very short campaign where he just does like live drawings, and you can pledge to have something included in the drawing, and it just culminates in this like shared piece of art, you know. Independent creators, the point I'm trying to make in a long-winded way is that independent creators have more flexibility on what they're able to do, I think, because of just the general freedom of it on Kickstarter, and that will make the experience more fun for them, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
and want them keep or encourage them to keep coming back to crowdfund and having fun and experimenting and making changes. Where a publisher may be more locked into a traditional model that works for them and is a way to fund and help fund some more projects, but may not be as like open ended and exciting.
Have you seen? Have you seen? We've seen companies that have become essentially crowdfunding. They've essentially become Kickstarter companies, right?
Sure.
That is 90% of what they do goes through Kickstarter. Um, but I guess my question is: have you seen those companies really start from scratch? Are they? It's been I've made this joke more than once that it shouldn't be called. I think I stole this joke from someone. It shouldn't be called Kickstarter. It should be called Kickender, right? You shouldn't come to Kickstarter with no audience and just an
Mm.
idea for a product, because it's difficult to really kind of maximize a campaign if you're not already bringing a crowd. Am I wrong about that? Or have you seen those kind of success stories where people have begun there and just stayed there, and that is their business, that is their distribution?
I mean, I think earlier on, I think you're right that that's the case now, where if you come to crowdfunding, it makes more sense to come with a set audience that you can bring or shuttle to the project, right?
Right.
We do have, Kickstarter. One thing that we're working on this year is just more feature enhancements to the site. So in the past 2 months, we've rolled out two things, changes to our pre-launch page. So you'll be able to tell a more effective story about here's what the campaign is. You give more details and information. Because before it was just the image, the title, and the description, and a button that said notify me. So there's not as much
Right.
context or things to get people excited there. So we rolled that out in the spirit of just wanting to give people more opportunity to spread the word and tell their story. And then we've also rolled out functionality called late pledges, which allows you to, once your campaign ends, you can have certain tiers and rewards available for a limited amount of time after the campaign. So it's kind of like BackerKit's pre-order store functionality, right?
Right.
You're allowing those people who maybe hear about it a little late or miss the opportunity because their financial situation wasn't in the place where they wanted it to be, they can still get in there in the spirit of flexibility. Um, so we're really, our goal as Kickstarter continues to develop is like we want to continue to make this the one-stop shop for people to like bring an audience, develop something really cool and interesting, and then continue to build that audience and that product line. But yeah, generally, I think where the platform is at now is it works very well for people who have like a predefined audience.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Would you say uh Would you say that there are Kickstarter comics? Are there certain kinds of books that just do better? I mean, aside from porn, let's just put that out there. But maybe there are books that would do really well on Kickstarter that would not do so well in a say a comic shop or in a bookstore or even Amazon, right? Let's say that it's not something about the environment of Kickstarter. It works for this. Have you seen that?
I don't know if I can pinpoint like a specific thing. I know that there's a lot of like queer content that has some adult themes on it, sort of more
Mm-hmm.
risque rather than necessarily strictly not safe for work. Although not safe for work content does do very well on the site, and there's sort of a wide variety of what that is and people's comfort level there. But there is very tasteful, not safe for work content that does well on the site that may be harder to put on the shelves because if there's breasts on the comics or whatnot or on the cover, it's harder for somebody to put that out there in a more family friendly or oriented store. It may just
That's
not be
true.
something you're interested in ordering, right? And so people are able to go get it directly from those folks, and everybody's happy.
Yeah,
Same with more queer friendly stuff, depending on the politics of where you are, it may be difficult to put that kind of content on the store. So having queer friendly, very vibrant content available direct to consumer does very well for us as well. But I don't know if there's a particular kind of book. I see a lot of like anime inspired anthologies or stuff that like Piao Studios does that I think does really well and is interesting. I saw an anthology for it was working class comics creators that got funded that I was like, wow, this is really interesting. That like this group of people got together and they were like, we want to make comics for just getting our start. And I think those types of projects are really great. So yeah, it's I don't there's not like one the beauty of Kickstarter is that there's not like one answer for that. Kickstarter comics is like very broad and very varied.
yeah.
And that's what I love about the space is I'm a big manga reader myself. I'm wearing a shirt that says manga, and like that's kind of the I generally look for manga or manga inspired things, and so it's fun to come across that on the site because there's not a ton of manga either, but I'm just constantly surprised by the things that I see and the cool, unique ideas that people are bringing. Um, so yeah, it's a very inspiring place.
What's it like? Speaking of places, you are uh remote, I assume. I think that are the Kickstarter headquarters are in New York, right? Is that
Kickstarter headquarters are in New York, and for a while before the pandemic, most everybody was New York based, but now we're remotely distributed
okay?
throughout the United States and some folks in the UK and Europe.
What's it like working for a company like that? I mean, I guess you've worked for a bunch of technical companies at this point. You're not disused to that space, but I'm curious to know that has been like for you.
It's interesting. So I am on a team in Kickstarter called Outreach. There are a variety of folks in roles like mine where we deal with different categories. We mentioned Oriana Leckert, who's the head of publishing. We also have people in the games category and design and tech. And the thing I like about my role is there's a lot of freedom in terms of me being able to isolate. I need to build a better relationship with retailers. Here's a creator that I want to reach out to. I get to call a lot of my own shots, right? And lead the
Right.
direction of where I think I could have a big impact in the category. But my role is pretty siloed. I'm a comics person within a tech company, right? Is how I've been talking about it because people are like, "You're back in comics." I'm like, "Yes, kind of."
Kind of. Yeah.
Technically, yes.
But I also get Fridays off and really good healthcare. So, that's not comics.
that yeah, not necessarily. But that's all to say, like, I'm still meeting a lot of folks. Kickstarter is ultimately this like living, breathing technical solution, right? And
Yeah.
so there is a CTO and engineers and people who are supporting. We have a whole really dynamic support team. So when people have issues, those are the people that they talk to. I direct them to the CS team. I can make recommendations to the CTO and the engineering team about here are things I think comics needs. And so I have to find that balance of any changes that I recommend for the site ultimately impact every category.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have to think about Kickstarter holistically. It's not just, in my world, it's just a comics funding platform, baby. But in reality, it's not. It's this
What?
larger public benefit organization that does a lot of good for the world.
Yeah.
And that's I find that experience very humbling because I think it's easy to just kind of get siloed and in your head about like comics are the most important thing, and for me they are.
Yeah.
But it's also good to understand when I bring solutions to the table that there's this whole chain of events that get impacted by the things that I recommend, and it's a a valuable continued lesson in working with people and understanding priority and just like figuring out how to make impactful change while still maintaining good relationships. Very diplomatic answer. I'm sorry. It's hard for me to not talk that way.
You're so corporate now. You can't not. You have to talk in that sort of, companies. Yeah, I get it. It's
A bit, yeah. But I really love working from home.
Yeah.
I have two small children. I like being able to have the flexibility to like do the things that I need to do. When I was in tech, the last tech job that I had a really great COO who she said in a big team meeting, she was like, I don't care when you get your work done, just make sure it gets done. And I was like, that's absolutely the attitude that remote workers need to have of like,
Yeah.
I have other priorities outside of work. If I have to take my kid to daycare or he gets sick, like you better believe that's where I'm going to be. I will
Yeah.
miss a meeting. But if I work after hours and get the things done that I need to get done, what does it matter? We don't need to be in the office to be effective. Like we can be wherever we need to be. So I'm very grateful to be able to continue to work remotely. I miss office life a little bit because you have those water cooler moments and
Sure.
you make friends more naturally. But there's a real beauty in being able to work from home. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I agree with both. Having spent so many years working in the Valiant office and the Top Cow office before that, having all those years working in the comic shop, they're wonderful, right? They're it's so good to be around the people that you're working with, and but it's also, I'm a dad too, and I've been working from home now for 6 years, so
Yep.
even before it was cool, pre-pandemic. So yeah, I totally understand it. It is incredible. All right, well let's transition. So I started this conversation in the intro. There was a moment. There were like 3 meetings specifically that I had in San Diego that suddenly a light bulb went off, and I was
Mm.
like, oh, I'm talking to the future of our industry now, right? I'm talking to someone who, if they want to be, is going to be here for a long time, probably in very different roles, right? You're probably going to move from one company to another. You're probably going to deal with different departments inside of companies. I know that, during my time in comics, I've touched everything
Yep.
aside from writing and drawing them, right? But so let's talk about what that future looks like.
Mm.
Do you think? Like, do you see the same transition I'm seeing, right?
Yeah,
And
totally.
yeah, what do you think that is there a shift that's going to happen other than just, that you're one of the fewer white guys? I don't know. Is there something, you know what I mean? It's yeah, yeah.
Just to be on the record, absolutely welcome that. Like,
As do I.
yeah,
As do
yeah.
I.
Like, I think it's great to have more diversity in the comic space, and like, I am really excited to just get to know more of those unique voices. I think it's gonna be like it's gonna be a slow change, and I don't say that in a demoralizing or sad way, but like
Sure.
I think it just takes time for people to find the right opportunities. We saw when I left Boom, Eric Harburn and Daphne Plebin both left, and they had been there for 15 years,
Yeah.
which is a huge amount of time, like especially when you're younger to dedicate to one place. And now, Eric's working for Tiny Onion. and Daphne is over at Viz, and they're both in these really new, interesting spaces. And I think we're going to see more of that, of maybe people have been in long-standing positions now taking this exciting next step and doing some new things. Or in the case of Morgan, kind of followed a similar path to me as far as following her resume, of going from Boom to Skybound, now to Square Enix, taking these opportunities for 3 to 4 year chunks, really learning the most that you can out of them, and then elevating yourself and making this like upward, not lateral, but an upward trajectory,
Sure.
to a new role. I was able to do that with Boom, of going from one role, sort of filling in the gap with other experiences, doing a distinctly different thing within the same company, and now I work for the platform that I was working for. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. I think just time. Yeah, it's not. It's kind of a non-answer, but like I think time will tell as the market changes and more specific opportunities open up. The right people will fill into those. I'm interested to see what like Tucker Stone does over at Fantagraphics, because I really
Hmm.
love the era of No Brow that he was in when like fantasy sports was coming out with Sam Bosma. Um, yeah, I just think there's this real like that like I know you had Avi on not that long ago, and he's definitely more DIY than I've ever been. But there is that like the group of people with the DIY, like fuck it, we're gonna do it live. We've had to like
Right.
pull off some really difficult stuff, are getting into situations now where they have more um, firepower and legitimacy and like budgets to be able to do things, but a bit of that mentality that like hunger is still there. And that's what I think is interesting about this space, is like they've tested their metal, they know what they're capable of, but they're still hungry to make like some big change in areas that they feel really interested in. And that's what I think is going to be fun to watch and interesting to watch.
As I don't want to make this a generation versus generation conversation because I think those conversations tend to be super boring.
Sure.
Um, but
And there's no right
as
answer.
there isn't, oh well, we're
Yeah,
better than you, obviously.
right.
Well, but there is this for those of us who have that kind of Gen X title above our on our license driver's licenses, and who knew they were stamping that on now. But there is this sort of characterization that I almost agree with, which is that we tend to be, I mean, in many ways, we were the first generation with like solid ADHD just crippling us. However, because of that, we're so interested in lots of things, and we're also very. I know that I say we because I'm married to one and have been married to more than one at this point, and so many of my friends of my generation, we like lots of getting good at lots of different things, and maybe not
Sure.
being great at any of them, but just like this sort of um, uh, kind of hacking shit together, right?
Sure.
MacGyver was the total Gen X guy, right? Right down to his mullet and his Swiss Army knife. And I think a lot of what like people like Avi, I think, have going for them is they come from that place of I want to learn just enough of this so that I can do it and move, get this thing done that I want to build, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you lose some of that? I mean, I don't know.
Hmm.
Generationally, you guys are more used to digital spaces than we were. We came up during, our first comics we had to make at Kinko's on a Xerox machine, right? You had to
Sure.
learn that. So I guess my question is do you lose some of that magic, or is it there a compensation there that I'm not seeing?
No, that's a great question. Um, here's how I. It's funny. I was just having a conversation about this last night. Like, I feel like our generation is maybe a generation of like specialists, right? I consider
Yeah.
myself a specialist now. Of like, I am the comics Kickstarter guy, and like
Yeah.
my skills fit a very specific puzzle piece, or I'm a
Right.
very specific puzzle piece in a very specific space. And I think where our generation benefits, not only in, we have a lot of people who are able to do that, and a lot of people who are able to come into pre-existing organizations who now want to expand and do new things, and we're able to push the right buttons and move things around. I think where we benefit is because of our exposure to the internet and really our exposure to like manga and manhwa and romance novels and yaoi and things like that is we're now developing more of that content that we wanted to see growing up or that we
Mm,
saw growing up, and we're able to bring it to more legitimate spaces. Like I think about Rebecca Taylor over at Inklore and Steph Hokut, who are over at Inklore and Penguin Random House. Like they're building really interesting stuff over there that I don't think would have existed or could have existed five,
yeah.
10 years ago in the market. I think Viz is starting to do some interesting stuff in that space. So you're seeing like traditional manga publishers, like we talked about manga in the 90s in another conversation. And like
Right.
I
Yeah.
love a lot of that stuff from Viz. Like I have a bunch of, I collect single issue manga as one of my like subsections in my collection. Um, but that's like such a particular era of manga, and it's like Rumiko Takahashi and like Kamui and all this tried and true stuff that they knew was going to work. And now we're entering this era of like originals and like
Right.
manga that is not necessarily manga, or like Felipe Smith did Pikachu from, no, that's not the right word, but Felipe Smith did that vertical comic. Pipochu is the
Okay.
title, where he actually went to Japan, went through the whole manga system of like having it in a weekly magazine, and then that was published there and then published again in America. I think we're going to see more experiences like that of people like going through different platforms and spaces in comics. And that's where our generation of like growing up with manga and kind of more global comics, for lack of a better term,
Sure.
and seeing that holistic approach are going to be able to like bring pieces of those experiences and, like you said, kind of build or amalgamate uh, a whole new experience just in the American side of things.
That's interesting. You talking about being a specialist, and one of the things that I realized, I don't think I was ever truly reached anything of what I would consider to be successful until I just embraced the fact that I'm a generalist,
Yeah, yeah,
right? I want to know how all the pieces fit together,
yeah,
and not and just be just good enough that I can tell what's good and what's bad. And so as a result, like if you ask me to be a specialist, I'm like, okay, you're gonna be disappointed very quickly,
yeah,
but also as a result of that, like I can see how what you're talking about is going to allow some of that storytelling that worked in manga, and in manga in the 90s was it was just such a weird light bulb moment of like this whole culture
yeah,
that we had never even seen before is suddenly presenting us stories in a language we thought we understood, comics, but like even they've literally flipped it over and made it so different, and yet it's the same. It was just such a unique experience. um and I'm working with a client right now that is has a very similar vibe. But I think that there's something you're saying there about the this generation of specialists, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that are going to be able to bring that to a larger platform, because specialists work better in groups, right?
yeah,
You work better in systems, whereas generalists, we tend to work better in smaller groups. And so, like, if I look back at the 90s, and there was plenty of romance comics, there was plenty of slice of life, there was plenty of horror, there were plenty of all of these genres that are now being taken to these larger platforms, but they were just so small.
yeah,
They were done by places like slave labor and like really, really small press that wasn't really getting out. Like we had our little pockets, and we were proud of our little pockets. So
yeah.
I guess a really an interesting idea is that because of that, because you're allowed to specialize now, you're able to bring this this forward. I hadn't
Well,
thought
and the
about that.
specialization thing is funny because for a long time, like I was a generalist. I was described early in my career as a utility player, and I kind of
Yeah,
adopted that. Generalist, I think, in certain circles and in certain industries, I found has a negative connotation to it. It's like you can do a lot of things, but you don't really do anything specific, and you're like,
yeah.
well,
Well, why do I
fuck you.
need you?
Like,
Yeah,
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 but in comics, it's a really important role. So if anybody's listening who is getting started and feels like they're not entirely sure where they want to go, try to embrace that generalist thing because
yeah.
my trajectory, and I think a lot of people in my generation will feel this way as well, is like I've been a generalist for so long that I eventually found the like specialization that I was looking for, and I was able to kind of like I'm a big Kamen Rider Tokusatsu fan. I always think about like I'm building my armor, and now I'm like, oh, I'm this guy now. Like I have this form and these abilities and these things that I'm able to do. And so for a while, it's just like the process of kind of like learning and building your core competencies. I'm sure that's true for your generation and
Sure.
generations that'll follow us, but for where I'm at right now and where my peers are at, I think we are all sort of hitting our specialization stride.
Yeah.
Um, it feels really cool. It's encouraging to see people end up in these really great spaces and to be able to hear about their experiences and celebrate their wins and point to my kids are too young to really get it, but like you point to a book on the shelf and you're like, I fucking know that guy, or like my friend worked
Oh
on that, and
yeah.
like I'm really proud of that.
Oh, that never
It's
loses its. When they get
oh
old enough to get it. Oh man, my kid goes into a comic shop and he's like, it's like I own the comic shop.
yeah,
He just wants to tell the people there about everything that I do, and it's wonderful, But yeah, it's that never ends. It's always going to feel good when your kid's
yeah.
proud of you. Yeah. It's interesting. So I just had another conversation that is not out yet. Will be out by the time this episode is. Conversation with a retailer who I've known for quite a while, and knew her very young age when she was starting her shop. And she talked about this like true desire for mentors, and she was going out and
Mm,
really looking for these mentors. Her name is Glennis Speak. She was Glennis Pruitt when I first met her. She's incredible retailer. And then now, as we talked, one of the themes of the conversation was that she's getting to a place now where she's mentoring.
mm.
So, have you had those sorts of relationships on both sides yet? Are you seeing that kind of?
Somewhat. I mean, Philip was in working at Boom, like Philip was a de facto mentor for me. Like we never sort of had an official like on the books relationship, but
Yeah.
obviously and
Well,
I've had
Comics Daddy apparently is his nickname now, which I love.
I've had mentors in Bob at Kamikaze. I would consider a mentor of mine, and some other folks in the space. Um, I think I've inadvertently mentored some folks. There's some
That's usually how it
folks,
happens. Yeah.
yeah, there's some folks that I was able to bring in when I left Boom who have filled the space and I think done a great job, and people that I worked with there where I think by the nature of being the more experienced employee, you just kind of by default are like, well, here's how I've done things, or I did do some mentorship. It's funny because that's more like, at least in my experience, that's more a deliberate thing in tech. You know what I mean? Like
Oh,
there
interesting.
are
Yeah.
mentorship programs that get set up. The company I worked at was a 900-person organization, and so they had a deliberate mentorship program where when you were at a company, you could sign up to be a mentor or be a mentee, and you got paired with somebody, and it helped you establish specific goals that you wanted to work towards and talk to people. I think those kind of programs can be really helpful. And I hope that in comics there's more intentionality if there are things. I look at like Penguin Random House acquiring Boom, right? There's a great opportunity to like get some mentorship from the people who've worked there for a long time, and vice versa, like allowing those editors at Boom to now go into the sea of a much larger organization that has different experiences and great mentorship there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, for me, I mentored a lot of. Uh, I'm laughing because I mentored a lot of guys in the game space. There
Oh,
was a
right.
young guy when we ran the Henshin Kickstarter who started a Discord for us, and he and I started a nice relationship. He's done some logo work for me and some other just like graphic design work for me. And he started making his own games. And so we spent a lot of time just talking about like the discipline and practice of doing that. And like he then went on to run some of his own Kickstarters and used the Henshin one as a template for what to do. Um, so I've kind of naturally just come across these like interesting, creative young men where I think I've shown up and been like, hey, you can do the thing that you want to do, and like you can do it on your own. Nobody has to tell you that it's okay to do it. You can just
Yeah.
go out and do it. And the right people who've been receptive to that and been like, oh, cool, like let me pick your brain.
Sometimes you need to
Yeah,
give people permission to not ask for permission, right? That's it.
totally,
Yeah.
totally. And I also think, not disparaging anybody's like family life or anything like that. Sometimes your family just like, at least my family is great. I love my parents. They were never very involved in like manga or comics or like
Right.
never. They would buy me things I was interested in, but they were never like super engaged as like what it was or the market or anything like that. Um, and I think having somebody who's a bit older than you shepherd you and show you that the
Sure.
thing you like is legitimate and you can make money off of it and like you can make things that are really interesting is helpful.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to like take the step to go into those spaces to find those people, you know,
Yeah.
and like take the risk and ask for help and ask for advice or ask to do something and then fail and be okay with failing. You know,
Yeah. No, that's very true. That is very true. Nothing. We're all just iterating, right? It's
yeah.
just what was it that it was oh shoot, I wish I could remember the quote now. There's something, the quote being Winston Churchill saying that something about the path to success is failing without losing energy.
Mm,
You know,
mm.
I'm gonna fucking up that quote, but whatever. All
We'll look it
right.
up later.
Yeah, exactly. Um, excellent. Well, this has been fantastic.
Yeah,
Sam, is
thank you
there
for having
anything
me.
else that we actually, there actually is one thing that you hit on just really quickly, and I want to not lose because it is a pet theory of mine, that comics is missing out on Discord. And since you come from a gaming place, I think of it as a system, as a structure that is incredibly useful for building audiences and building community, that comics just has not embraced like gaming and tech have, right? Have you seen this, or am I just off my bet nut? Have you?
Uh, no, I mean, I think your intuition is right. Here's the thing: my experience with Discord has been mixed. I have built a really strong, engaged community, or I was given access to a space that had a strong, engaged community that was interested in my particular niche. Um, I think the thing that there's two things that sort of come up when you think about Discord and community management in general, is like it's a lot of work to keep the community engaged and manage, and that is
Sure.
like somebody's full-time job. So if a comic publisher wants to get involved in doing that, hell, if there's one person who's like, I'll run everybody's Discord for all of these publishers, like you probably could do that. You could probably start a business doing that. There's also, I think the thing that you see in games is, unfortunately, I think in those spaces there tends to be a lot of toxicity, or there's just a lot of like management, kind of like a etiquette management that needs to be taken into account. Where I've had some bad actors, unfortunately, on my Discord. A person that we like gave the benefit of the doubt of, I think, one too many times, and then unfortunately had to like kick out, and they were still a problem after that. Um, and you see it depending on what kind of comics community you're in. You see it in a lot of spaces. A lot of licensed
Sure.
material, I think, has this as well. Um, so I, I think if people are going to approach Discord, like proceed with a plan, and then like don't hesitate to take action if people are not acting appropriately, and like be very clear with like how you expect people to act. Like a very clear code of conduct, I think, is necessary for those kind of communities, because it can just get like really crazy really quickly. Because it's also, I mean, Kickstarter, or sorry, not Kickstarter, Discord, it's very easy to just like you see the icon and you see the words, and there's not much else. There's voice chats and everything like
Yeah,
that, but
exactly.
it's primarily just like posting.
Yeah, it's just a forum. It's like the
Yeah.
old school forums. Yeah, but it's the controls that you have as the server owner that I think are make it super powerful. But you're right. It's going to be it is a big investment in time and money.
It's a lot of work.
One last question. Why do people still do stretch goals? They just seem dumb to me. They just don't. I don't understand them.
I think you can do some really fun stuff with stretch goals, and I want people to reconsider that. When we were at Boom, one of the Lumberjanes ones we did was we would do donations to comic books for kids. And I want to be clear about that because Kickstarter does have some rules about donations to charities. We donated the books that we were funding, so the library editions of the Lumberjanes, we would donate those to libraries. So you can donate, say you're making a book and you want to donate some copies of those, you're
Yeah.
essentially adding orders to your print order by raising that more money. That's a way for you to say, give back to the community, to engage with people who really need it, be it libraries or other organizations. So there's an opportunity to build goodwill there. Stretch goals also, here's the thing about stretch goals is like you gotta plan that shit out. You almost gotta plan it like it's like separate rewards that you are already going to be prepared for, so it doesn't feel
Yeah.
like it's a surprise to you. When we did the Henshin Kickstarter, we kind of did that where we were like, we're gonna do stretch goals, and then because it kept getting so successful, we were like, we're gonna add more playbooks to the book. And the playbooks fortunately aren't that difficult to write, but like we had to source the new art and like we had to just sort of make sure that the artist was on top of that. And so all that communication happened before that went out and we secured it, which is what I would recommend people do is like have your shit locked down before you put the stretch goal out. Um, but I think used effectively, people shouldn't feel like they have to use stretch goals, but
Yeah.
people should be encouraged to use them if there's something thoughtful and well planned behind it.
All right.
Is how I
That's
feel
fair.
about it.
That's
Yeah.
fair. I don't know. They always just seem like a landmine to me, but I can see how you
It's
can use
yeah.
them effectively, you know?
Yeah. It's I think that's a fair assumption. A lot of people have gotten bitten by them, but I think there's ways to utilize them effectively. It's just it
Yeah.
all comes down to good planning. Like
Yeah.
Kickstarter success all comes down to good planning and being prepared for what you're getting into.
Spoken like a true project manager. Right there. That's what it is.
It's true.
Sam, is there anything else that we can talk about before I lose you for the evening? I know that you got your kiddos there. Is
Uh, no, I don't. I would just say that, if people are interested in talking about how Kickstarter can benefit them or just want to talk about the comics industry in general, like my door is always open. The beauty of this space, as you know, is like I don't know who I don't know and I don't know what I don't know. And
Yeah.
I constantly try and remind myself of that, of like it's really great to meet people of different experiences and different walks of life so we can all not cater, but all sort of work towards this like shared goal. We're all just trying to put out cool stuff at the end of the day, and we
Yeah.
all benefit from each other being successful. So if you want to have a conversation with me, let me know. Happy to be in touch. And hopefully I'll see. Be nice. Just also be nice. Just be nice to me. If you see me out on the convention floor, come say hi, shake my hand. Yeah,
Yeah.
happy to chat.
And corner him to make sure that he becomes your mentor, right? I think that's make sure